Hello everyone, my name is Vivek. I am a software developer and I make videos about Kubernetes, containers, Go as a programming language, and sometimes software engineering in general. So in this particular video, I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks about the command line tool that we use to communicate to or to access our Kubernetes cluster. So there are a lot of commands that we use pretty frequently, but there are some commands that are pretty useful, but a lot of us are not very aware of those particular commands. So those are the commands that we are going to discuss about in today's video. So there are chances that I would be making another part of this video series about tips and tricks. So the very first command that I would like to discuss about is help. How do we get help about kubectl commands or subcommands? So if I just go ahead and try to write kubectl hyphen help, I would like to highlight that I have set the alias k to kubectl. That is why I'm going to use k instead of kubectl, right? So this is another thing that you can do. I think a lot of people just use k as alias for kubectl. So if you just go ahead and try to enter kubectl hyphen help, we would be able to see every command that is supported for kubectl, right? For example, create, expose, and every other thing. So now let's just say that we have to figure out the sub command for create, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say kubectl create hyphen help, right? And it is going to get me all the sub commands for create, right? So for example, kubectl create can be used with, let's say, these many commands. We can create cluster roles, bindings, config maps, and every other thing that is mentioned here, right? And we can use kubectl create to create the resources out of the manifest files as well. So for example, kubectl create, and then we can provide the manifest file using the flag hyphen f, right? So one thing that I would like to highlight here is, let's say you have your customize manifest. Customize is another dependency management tool for Kubernetes, I would say. In that case, you can use hyphen k as well, right? So that is one thing that I would like to highlight here. And let's say for create and then deployment, I have to figure out what are all the arguments that are supported. So kubectl create and then deployment, and I'm going to say help, right? And then it just tells me all the things that are supported after kubectl create deployment. So we will have to specify name and then image, like it is mentioned here, and every other option is mentioned here as well, right? So this is how you can just go ahead and try to figure out the command on your own, right? You don't actually have to Google for things. For example, you don't have to Google how to create deployment using kubectl. You can just use hyphen help to figure the things out, right? So let's say we have So let's say we have a manifest, right? And we want to create a resource out of that manifest. But before that, a very important command, I would say, is how do we actually create manifest of resources. So for example, let's say you have to create manifest of a deployment, right? There are chances that you would not have that manifest on top of your head. So what you can do is you can use kubectl command to create the deployment, right? So just form the command to create the deployment. So kubectl create deployment, right? And we have seen that this command expects hyphen image, and let's say we provide image to be nginx, and we want this deployment to be created in default namespace, right? Now we have formed this command, but we don't actually want to create the resource. We want to create the manifest for this particular resource. So what we can do is we can specify dry run, and then output should be in YAML format. And if I just go ahead and try to press enter, this particular resource would not actually be created, but we would be getting the YAML format, right, for this particular command. And we have to specify the name as well. So let's say the name is nginx, and you can see that now we have manifest of the deployment resource. So this is how you can create resource of, or you can create manifest of almost any resource that you want to, right? So for example, let's say you want to store this deployment manifest in a file. What you can do is you can just redirect this to a file. Let's say deploy.yaml, right? And now you have a file deploy.yaml that has manifest of deployment, right? Similarly, if I show you another example, so let's say you have to create manifest of secret, right? Again, there are chances that you would not actually remember the secrets manifest on top of your head. So what you can do is kubectl create secret, and then type, let's say, generic, right? And after that you have to specify the name test secret, and we want to create the secret. We know that secret is a key value store. So from literal name equals password equals to secure password, right? Now if I just press enter here, this is going to create a resource, a secret resource with this particular name in default namespace. But let's say you don't actually want to create the resource, you want to create the manifest for this particular resource. So what you can do is dry run and then YAML. It simply means that output should be in YAML format, and then redirect that to a file named secret.yaml, right? And if I cat that, we can see that a secret manifest has been created. Now you can ask that if someone doesn't remember how the manifest of secret looks like, how he is going to, or how they are going to remember this command, right? So we discussed about this, that this command can easily be figured out using help. So let's just go ahead and try to figure this thing out. So kubectl create, right, and secret, we want to create secret, and if I press help, we would be able to get the other commands, for example generic, and that is what we have used here, right? And then after that, if I just say generic, let's say if we get something else, and here we go, we are actually seeing some of the examples here, right? So this is how you don't actually have to remember these commands. This is how you can figure out these commands, and from these commands you can actually go ahead and try to create the manifest. So for example, let's say I have to create manifest for this particular command, right? So this command just says create a secret, generic secret named my secret in default namespace, because we are not providing any namespace, right? And from literals, key 1 equals to super secret and key 2 equals to top secret. Now if I just press enter, this is going to create a secret resource. But if I want to create manifest, what I can do is dry run and YAML, and then new secret .yaml, and if I cat that, we can see that this manifest has been generated, right? So this is one way, and this is pretty useful sometimes to create manifest for the resources that you want to create, right? You can create the resource, you can create the manifest for services, for anything that you want to, provided that you have the command to create that resource, right? So the other thing that I would like to discuss about is, so for example, let's say we have two resources here, right? New secret.yaml and secret.yaml. So to create these resources, what we can do is we can just go ahead and try to create these resources using by applying them separately, right? So kubectl create secret hyphen f, and then we can just go ahead and say kubectl create f secret.yaml, right? The other way to do these things is we can merge these two manifest into one, right? So for example, let's say we have secret.yaml and we have new secret.yaml. Let's say we have to merge secret.yaml into new secret.yaml. We can separate two manifests in the same YAML file using hyphen thrice. So let me just go ahead and try to show that to you. So let's say this is one manifest, and I'm going to edit new secret.yaml to add another manifest, and this is how we do it, right? So we are separating two manifests by this separator, that is hyphen hyphen hyphen. If I just go ahead and try to save it, right, now in new secret we have two manifests. Let's just go ahead and try to list all the secrets from default namespace. And if I create new secret, I should see two more secrets, right? So and here we go, right? So this is how you can use more than one resource manifests in the same .yaml file, right? Now what I would like to discuss about is getting the resources, right? So for example, let's say you have to get a particular resource, right, from a specific namespace. We know that kubectl get resource and then hyphen ns name, right? So let's say we want to get pod from default namespace or cube system namespace. This is the command that we are going to use, right? Now there are chances that you don't just want to get pods but all the resources from cube system namespace, right? So you can say kubectl get all hyphen n cube system namespace, right? And even if we are specifying all here, we are not actually getting all the resources from this namespace, right? We are just getting the workloads, services, and that's it, right? So what for example, if there is a PVC present in this particular namespace, that is not going to be part of this particular output, right? So we have to keep that thing in mind when we are using all, right? Now there are chances that you want to get some resource from all the namespaces, right? So for example, we want to get pods, right, from all the namespaces. So this is the command to do that, kubectl get pods and hyphen hyphen all namespaces. And some people actually use uh, hyphen capital A instead of hyphen hyphen all namespaces. And again, this can be figured out using the help command that we discussed about. So kubectl get pods and hyphen hyphen help, we should be able to see all namespaces somewhere, right? And hyphen capital A can also be used for that. So yeah, apart from that, let's say you want to get the output in a specific format. So for example, kubectl get pods hyphen n cube system, and if I say hyphen o json, we are getting the entire output in the json format, right? uh, Now, the other thing that I would like to discuss about is, I think I have discussed about this in some of the previous videos as well. So for example, for every command that we run here, eventually an endpoint of Kube API server is requested, right? So to figure out that endpoint, what we can do is we can specify the logging label, I think verbose logging, to let's say 6, and then we can see that this is the endpoint that is being called, right? So from cube system namespace we want to get all the pods. So to figure out the actual endpoint that is being called, for a particular kubectl command, this is what we can do, right? Apart from that, the other thing that I would like to discuss about is, so let's say we most of the time try to get all the pods from a specific namespace or from all the namespaces. So there are chances that you would want to know which particular node this particular pod is assigned on. So you can specify wide, right? So this simply means that the output is going to contain some extra columns, and in that column we are actually getting the pod IP. Here we were not actually getting pod IP. So pod IP and the node where this particular pod is scheduled on. So since we just have one node in this particular Kubernetes cluster, all the pods are just scheduled on that particular node. The other thing that I would like to discuss about is, for example, let's say a lot of times we would like to figure out label for this particular pod, right? So there are a lot of ways. Either we can just describe this particular pod, right? So let's say kubectl describe pod from cube system namespace, and name of the pod is core DNS. So we can just go ahead and try to have a look into the labels, right? So these are all the labels that this pod has, but there is a shorter way to do this. So cube system and hyphen show labels. So now this actually shows me the label of that particular pod, right? So yeah, apart from that, the other thing that I would like to discuss about here is, since we are discussing about labels, so for example, let's say you have to see the logs of this particular pod, right? So what you can do is you can just say kubectl logs hyphen n cube system and then the pod name, right? And maybe follow the log, right? So this is one way you can see the logs. But if this pod is restarted, right, there are chances that, hold on. So if this pod is restarted, there are chances that the name of this pod is going to change. So this is not a good example, I think, because this is static pod and this is going to have the same name all the time. But there are chances that if we are seeing log of a particular pod and that pod is restarted, there are chances that the name of the pod is going to change, right? Then the law, okay, let me just go ahead and try to show you how what I'm talking about. So let's just go ahead and try to create a deployment in default namespace. Name of the deployment is nginx and image that I'm going to use is nginx, right? And if I just get pods here, this is the name of the pod, right? Now if I see log of this particular pod, okay, so this pod is still being created. Let's just wait for this pod to be up and running. Meanwhile, I can discuss about another cool thing, that is watch, right? So for example, you watch this particular resource from default namespace. You can just use kubectl git pods, and then you can add watch. Watch is a Linux construct, I think. This doesn't actually have to do anything with Kubernetes. So this is going to rephrase the output of this particular command every 2 seconds, I think. So you can actually see in real time what is the status of your resource. So now back to what we were discussing about earlier. So let's say we have to get logs of this particular command, right? So we are able to see the logs, everything is working as expected, right? Now if I just go ahead and try to delete the pod, and if we want to see the log of new pod that is being created, the previous logs command that we ran is not actually going to work, right? Because the new pod that is being spinned up has a separate name, right? Like we are seeing here. So in this particular case, what we can do is we can actually see the logs by labels. So if I say kubectl get pods hyphen show labels, right? So this is the label that this particular pod has. Now if I just go ahead and say kubectl logs hyphen l, right, and here, right? So we are not specifying the pod, but we are specifying the labels, right? So we want to see logs of the pods that have this particular label. In this particular case, if I just go ahead and try to delete the pod, right, this command is going to work even for the new pod that is going to get spinned, right? So this is the pod, that new pod that was created, and the logs command that we ran earlier is now going to work for this particular pod as well. So this is pretty useful sometimes to see the logs, right? Now, the other thing that I would like to discuss about is, let's say your pod has more than one container, right? So in that case, you will have to specify which particular container you want to see the log of, right? So for example, kubectl logs, and then this kubectl logs, and let's say this pod, right? And if this particular pod has more than one containers, you will have to, or you should specify which particular container you want to see the log of. So for example, this pod has a container named nginx, and we can specify that using -c, right? Now if this container, or if this pod has more than one container, we will have to specify those containers, or we can specify all the containers. In other words, let's say you want to see the logs of all the containers, right? So you can do that by all containers, right? And this is how you can specify that get me logs of this particular pod of all the containers, right? But this can become noisy sometimes. So for example, there are some supporting containers that are running in this particular pod. So in that case, logs of those containers are, let's say, not that important. So this output can become noisy, and in that case, you should always try to specify a specific container you want to see the logs of, right? Yeah, this was about logging. Another thing about logging is we can see the logs using the services as well. So for example, let's say we have this deployment, right? And let's say if I just go ahead and try to create service for this particular deployment. Now the same logs, or logs from the same workload or deployment, can be seen using this particular service as well, right? So let's say your deployment is running multiple replicas of a particular pod. So in that case, if I just go ahead and try to have a look into pods, so here this deployment is running just one replica of the pod, right? Now if I just go ahead and try to scale deployment, nginx, and two replicas, let's say 3, right? And kubectl get pods. Now we have 3 pods up and running. Now there are chances that we would like to see logs from all the containers, right? So there are other ways as well. There are some other utilities to do that. You can just specify regex for the pod name, but the other way to do is you can use services as well. So kubectl log svc slash nginx, right? And this is how you can uh, see the log of. Okay, so it looks like this shows us. Okay, interesting. So I thought this is going to get me logs from all the pods, but it actually chooses one, right? So I was actually wrong about this, I think. So it found three pods, but it is getting the logs from just one pod, right? So yeah, I mean, if you have to get logs from all the pods, there are some other utilities, for example stern and others that can be used to do that. uh, Apart from that, what I would like to discuss about is, for example, let's say you have kubectl get pods, right? And as we discussed, this when we query or when we run this particular command, a particular endpoint from the API server is being hit or is being requested. So we can request that endpoint directly as well, right? So, and we can do that using kubectl get and hyphen raw. And what we have to do now is we just have to specify the endpoint that we want to query, right? So but before that, we will have to somehow figure out the endpoint. So, and we know that to figure out the endpoint, we can use this logging label, and this is the endpoint that is being requested, right? So let's just go ahead and try to do that. Try to use raw to get the pods, and here we go, right? We are getting the exact same thing. So this returns pod list, like here, and this has items with name that we want to write. So we are actually getting the same response, but in the different format, right? uh, yeah. Another thing that I would like to discuss about is JSON path. So, for example, let's say you have specified this command kubectl get pods, right? But you actually want to get specific fields, right, of this output, right, on based on some certain conditions, right? So let me reframe that. So for example, let's say if I just go ahead and try to get pods from all namespaces, we are going to get all these pods, right? Now let's say we want to, all these pods are going to have a field in their manifest named node name, right? So, and that is how we can see that in the white detailed. So now let's say our requirement is to figure out the node where all these pods are scheduled, right? Or let's say we have to figure out all the pods that are scheduled on a particular node, right? So for example, uh, we have this output, right? And from this output, if we specify the node name, we want to get all the pods that are scheduled on that node, right? So we have to perform some operation into this particular output that we have, right? And things like this can be achieved using this flag or this output format named JSON path. So let's just go ahead and try to have a look at the output, right? And we want to get all the pods from all the namespaces that are scheduled on a particular node. So if I just go ahead and try to enter JSON path, I have discussed about this in brief in one of my previous videos as well. For example, I think the one where I discussed about kubectl plugins. So hyphen o JSON path, if I just say JSON, this is how the output is going to look like. right? So items, and inside items is a list, obviously, because we are getting list of pods, and from this items we can see that this items is a list of pods manifests, right? So this is a pod manifest. In this pod manifest we have name of the pod in metadata dot name, I think. So metadata dot name, and we have the node name for the field spec dot node name, right? So to form the command, let me just go ahead and form the command, and then we can discuss about this. So what we are saying is get me items, right? And if I enter this is a map. So to get a value from the map, we have to specify a key, right? So where now we have to specify the condition that the node name is the node name that we want to get the pods of. So dot, and we know that now we have a single element here, right? So now we have a pod. So pod dot spec dot node name equals to, here we are going to specify the node name. So let's say the node name is kind, right? We should not get this output. Here we go. So it simply says that uh, get me everything, right, where the key has this, where the item has this particular condition. So pod dot spec, we know that output of dot items is pod list, right? And from pod list we are specifying that the pod dot spec dot node name should be the node name that we want to get the pods of. And from that we don't actually want to get entire pod manifest. From pod we want to get metadata dot name, right? And if we just go ahead and get the node name, and here we go, right? Here we can see all the pods that are scheduled on this particular node, right? So this is another pretty useful command, I would say, -o json path to figure out things. Now we can actually format this output as well. For example, for every pod name we can specify new lines, but you can I think figure that out by looking at the documentation and other things, I think, or other places. So yeah, there are some other things that I would like to discuss about. So for example, let's say you are editing a resource. So let's say kubectl edit deployment, and the field that you are editing is immutable. So edit deployment nginx, and I'm not sure which particular field is immutable here. So let's say so we have to figure out an immutable field for this particular resource. Okay, so it simply says that we tried to edit something that was immutable, so the changes were not actually made, right? But the file that we created has been stored here. So now if we just go ahead and try to look into that file, we can see that we should be able to see our changes, but that change was not actually stored. So we see our change here, but this change is not actually stored. So now we can just go ahead and try to maybe delete that resource, and then we can apply this again, right? So this is another thing that I wanted to discuss about. So if we try to change an immutable field, the changes are not actually made, but the file is stored in our temp directory. Yeah, so I think this was almost it. Another thing that I would like to discuss about is if we want to, let's say, manage our kubeconfig file. So we have discussed about this. Kubectl actually refers kubeconfig file to figure out the clusters and other details, for example, authentication and authorization mechanisms. So to see that, we can use kubectl config, and we can see all the commands here. For example, kubectl config view, and if there are details of more than one clusters in your kubeconfig file, you can specify use context to figure out or to specify which particular cluster you want to talk to. And or you can use current context. So for example, kubectl config, and then current context can be used to figure out which particular context we, or which particular, in simpler words, which particular Kubernetes cluster we are talking to, provided that your kube config file has a lot of details of a lot of clusters. So yeah, I mean, this was pretty much it about what I wanted to discuss about in this particular video. If you like this, you can consider subscribing and sharing it with your connections, and you can try to follow me on Twitter. And this was pretty much it. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.